Hey guys, caught me just taking my new Cybertruck for a spin. All right, so obviously I can't afford a Cybertruck, and I sure as hell can't afford a Cybertruck just for the sake of shooting at it, but I was very lucky to have someone who had a run-in with a deer and had offered their parts for the sake of, you know, a little trial and error. I know this is a concept that has been absolutely beaten to death. There are countless videos online of people shooting at their Cybertrucks, but you watch all of those videos and people are always shooting at the doors for a few good reasons. Bigger surface area, easier shots, but more importantly, the claims that a Cybertruck is bulletproof come from the idea that the doors are bulletproof and the frame is bulletproof. And then I guess depending on which model you get, the windows may or may not be. The standard door measurement is gonna be about 3 millimeters, so it's gonna be rated for a 9mm round, which is gonna be the equivalent of a 3A body armor bulletproof rating. So the panels here that I have to shoot at today are actually gonna be about 1.4 millimeters. Unfortunately, we could not convince the deer to hit the door, so this is what we're working with. But it is a good conversation in terms of, how about the design for the rest of the truck? Sure, maybe your doors are bulletproof, but what if someone shoots towards the hood or through the fenders? What if there's weird angles and you can still get in towards the driver? You know, the doors being bulletproof aren't exactly enough if you're concerned about going through a rough neighborhood, I guess. So, without further ado, we're gonna run through a couple of calibers. We're gonna do a little science experiment and see exactly how bulletproof the other parts of the car, the other parts of the truck, wind up being. Starting off and likely ending here, I do have subsonic 22. You can see here that this is about 45 grains and an expected 835 feet per second. This is gonna be our best chance of not going through, although considering how thin that is, I'm not expecting much, but let's give it a go. Took me a little bit to find it here. I thought I might have missed for a second. Surprisingly, this round actually did not go through. You can see right here, there's a little bit of a dent. Really no serious damage. I'm kind of curious at this point what a regular 22 would do. So we're gonna just keep trying and see how much this can take. So surprisingly, the subsonic 22 was stopped. So we're gonna just do regular. You can see I have standard velocity. I guess this is around 40 grains, but typical 22, I mean, like every other round that has a bit of a range on it. Let's see how much of a difference that makes. So you can see I hit this very top edge right here, and surprisingly, this was also still stopped. You can see a difference between the two. This one has a much more distinct, like, actual pin right there, whereas this is kind of just like a more broad dent. We are slowly working our way up. Since 22 did not disappoint, in my hand I have 32. These rounds here are gonna be about 71 grains, and I'm shooting out of this tiny little nightmare of a thing, so let's try our luck. We are still having success with this thing, despite how thin it is. You can see here, that's the 32 shot there. Much like the first 22, the subsonic 22, it left a very shallow dent, obviously a much larger crater, but this did a great job stopping it so far. Slowly working our way up. Next on the list is gonna be 38 Special. You see I have right here. You can see it has a very soft, blunt nose, that solid lead up there. I think it might be stopped. As always, let's go check it out. Just like I thought, very surprisingly so, this was stopped. Granted, definitely did some damage. No, you can't see on the back. Yeah, and this was out of a rifle, so it's gonna be a little bit higher velocity than if I were shooting it out of a pistol. Moving up to what Tesla has claimed these are rated to stop, I do have 9mm in my hand next. You can see here I have a nice little lipstick round. This is gonna be a subsonic 9 shooting at 150 grains. Underneath that I do have a regular 9 round, so we're just gonna do both in one go, see what happens. Given the performance of the 38 Special, I kind of think maybe the subsonic is gonna be stopped. I'm expecting 9 to go through, and then everything past that point is just gonna be shooting for the fun of shooting, but who knows, I was surprised with 22. Just as I thought, the subsonic was actually stopped. You can see it cracked it pretty hard there, but hey, it didn't go through. 9 mil as is, on the other hand, there's a hefty little hole there. She's seen better days. So I guess technically it is rated for 9 mil, just not 9 regular, but again, I was expecting the 22, so this is amazing as far as I'm concerned. The next logical step, we're gonna be doing 300 Blackout. I do have subsonic and supersonic. You can see there's obviously a massive grain difference between the two, understandably so. So the 300 subsonic is actually gonna perform more akin to like a 45 ACP round, and the 300 super is gonna be more comparable to a 7.62. I'm expecting both of these to go through, but this might kind of lag behind and leave less of a pretty hole. This is probably gonna go straight through clean. Yeah, you can even hear that difference. So pretty cool, actually. The subsonic round was stopped very well. Like, it's not even like a little, like, just barely peeking through. That is a nice crater. Looks similar to kind of these rounds we got here. But as expected, the 300 super did go straight through, left a nice little, you can see all that in the back. I would like to point out though that the 300 super, you can see that hole size is significantly smaller than what the 9 mil had done, which is going to be a product of how the tip is pointed. Those are obviously much sharper, much more conical entry. So that transfer, the energy transfer is going to be way more direct through, whereas the energy transfer on this one, since it has a larger surface area, you can see that much larger impact, the much larger hole that was left behind. Next up, we're going to be trying 357 Magnum. I do have 2 rounds here. You can see one is kind of just the standard, and the second one is Extreme Penetrator Ultra 357. They're both around the 150 grain mark, except obviously going significantly faster. This round here, the first one we're going to be shooting, is kind of going to be an in-between of the 2 300 rounds, the sub and super. I'm expecting both to go through. Obviously, this one is going to be the Extreme Penetrator one is going to be going through. But since the car was able to stop the 300 subsonic round, who knows, maybe this one will surprise me too. Today has been full of them. Let's go. The 357 Magnum was these 2 shots here. You can see that the regular round left a much larger hole. And you can see in the back even just some pedaling on the metal as it had fallen back, it had peeled forward. Whereas the Extreme Penetrator, I mean, as expected, it left a much sharper, cleaner cut, but the remnants in the back, it kind of chewed it up a little bit more. It's definitely a much more rugged, jagged, less nice exit wound. Last but not least, 5.56, which obviously is just gonna destroy this thing. I am shooting M855, and if you follow me on Instagram, then you recognize this nice new Steezy mag that I just painted. I love it, Miami Tiger Stripe. So, it's probably gonna be a very crisp cut, but let's find out. Oh yeah, that's clean. So the 5.56 round was this nice little hole right here. And I mean, as expected, that is a clean shot. That thing just ate right through. It is a tiny hole. That energy was cleanly dispersed, and you can see in the back that even the exit wound, I mean, this thing could have gone through a couple of these with no problem, but not surprising. We all expected that. Still very fun to shoot. And of course, what kind of video would this be if we didn't have a nice little fun montage of this thing being demolished once we were done with all of that science-y stuff? So, I figured this would be a good opportunity to kind of talk about the different methods of target failure. Obviously, we know there's different ways rounds can fail and impact, but there's a lot of different ways that once they actually hit their target, that the target itself is going to respond. And we can group that into kind of 5 basic types. I think some of these you're gonna be more familiar with than others, like piercing is one we all know, but we can also talk about plugging, spalling, pedaling, and scabbing. So some of these you're not really gonna see that often. Something like scabbing, I don't think a lot of people are as familiar with, and definitely not something we saw here with this target, but I do kind of have some pieces. So this is not a scab, but the best way I can explain it is that scabbing is going to occur like spalling, but it's gonna have a larger plate fracture. In scabbing, towards the back of the target, you're gonna see kind of that plate come off and fracture, much like removing a scab. So you're not gonna see that material removed in the front, but you're gonna see a little bit of that surface separate from the whole of the material and pop right off. I think that kind of makes sense with the name. Like I said, not something you see as common, but it does occur. Spalling, like I said, is very similar to scabbing. You largely see the spall coming out towards the front of the target though. That's something a lot more people are familiar with. Not something that happened with this target, so we're gonna grace blast it. But another big one that people see often is pedaling. And you can think of pedaling more common with the actual projectile failing with things like hollow points. This was actually found after the 357, the regular version, not the super. You can see that it had a very beautiful pedaling, gorgeous flower here, but the jacket just completely sprawled open. But you're gonna see that on your target as well. It's gonna happen on those more ductile materials when you have your circumferential stresses are gonna be very high and your velocity is gonna be extremely high towards that like ballistic limit. You can see here, like the target started to bend back and create those little flower petals. You can see the petals kind of occurred much better in some spots than others, and it's not always going to be a very even, pretty little petal like you see with something like hollow points, because those are designed to break more consistently. But like I said, it's going to be those high radial and circumferential stresses on that target all at one spot. Plugging, again, you're going to see that in highly ductile materials. So something like the steel here that we were shooting at is actually a good candidate for plugging. Again, not as common of a one, but you'd probably see remnants of the projectile stuck inside, kind of expanded and exactly plugging the hole. You usually see that much more commonly in blunt nose projectiles. So if any of the rounds we shot at this today were going to do it, it probably would have been the 38 special, but even then, that's not really the right kind of circumstances to allow for that type of failure to occur. And then last but not least, what the majority of these wind up being is piercing, which is what we typically think of when we think of target failure, especially when we use higher calibers through weaker targets. You know, you pierce through paper, you shoot 5.56 through this thin steel, you're gonna pierce right through that. So piercing occurs from hydrodynamic erosion, which is big and scary sounding. But what's happening is that the projectile is able to push the material aside as it's going through. So there's not going to be that direct contact with the target as it passes. It parts it much greater and creates that large separation. You can see higher impact forces. Like the 9mm, for example, had a much larger hole because it was able to transfer that energy in a way that created a larger separation barrier between the projectile as it went through and the target. But something like the 5.56 with a very tiny hole, it was able to maintain a lot of that energy. It could have gone through something thicker. It could have gone through something behind the target with much more success because that energy wasn't just all dumped right up front. So something that occurs with piercing that is like a telltale sign of it happening is you're actually going to see some deposition of the projectile material left in the wound channel. So you can see here, might be tricky for you guys, but there's definitely remnants of that copper around the outside. You can see it clearly had left part of it, trace amounts within that hole. If you were to look through any number of these that it did successfully pierce, you're going to see traces of it. That's all I had for you guys, so thank you so much for watching. Thank you again to the generous donor of those panels. And if you're a deer watching this, maybe consider hitting the doors next time so we have something more proper to shoot at. But either way, I think this was a great learning experience. I think this was a great experiment for kind of understanding the whole Cybertruck design and not just one little small section. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I had fun, and I will see you guys next time.